We have been looking at the character of God lately. And as we've explored the story of Scripture and looked at the different attributes of who he is, who he claims to be, and who we find him to be within the story, we've explored some different ones. We've explored his compassion, his grace, his slowness to anger. And within his slowness to anger, we stopped for a minute and we looked at his judgments and his wrath and saw kind of what all that was about. And how those all play throughout the story of the Bible, how God responds to us, how God views us in this way. And so we've seen all of these attributes described in Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. And we've seen how this God is the same God in the Old Testament as he is in the New Testament. He has not changed. Even today, he is the same. So now we're going to explore the next word that God uses to describe himself. So let's read that passage again. And it says this: "And Yahweh passed over before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, God who is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding with loyal love and faithfulness, giving loyal love to the thousands, and forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. And he does not leave utterly unpunished, punishing the guilt of the father on the sons and on the sons of sons, on the third and fourth generations." And now we see this next word is loyal love, or your translation may translate it differently. This word has a lot of different translations. The Hebrew word is chesed, and it can be translated by the ESV as steadfast love. The NASB or the King James may do it translated as mercy or loving kindness or just kindness. The NIV translates it as love or unfailing love, or the LEV would be loyal love. And so this kind of cues us into an interesting fact here about this word. The translators of the Bible are struggling to find a word or a group of words to adequately describe what this word means for us. Our language doesn't fully convey what is going on here. We see this word is used 245 times and is translated differently throughout the Bible depending on what translation you're using and the context. 75% of the time it's used in reference to God. So this is an important word for God. And in fact, it's the only word or phrase that is used twice in the description of God in Exodus 34, 6, and 7. Interesting little piece there. And so this word is full of meaning, and it's full of a lot of different ideas. Really the reason that we have so many words, so many translations, is because it has so many different parts. The full-bodied meaning of this word really kind of takes a sentence, so I'll do my best to describe it. It's a covenant type of love that only happens within covenant. And it's this idea of graciousness, of generosity, of commitment, and of affection. So there's a lot of feeling in this word, there's a lot of loyalty in this word, and there's a lot of extraness in this word, as you might say, or generosity. And so the idea of this is when you make a covenant or a promise with someone, when you show this type of love to that person that you're in covenant with, you go above and beyond what the covenant requires of you. Way more than what the person ever thought or agreed to. So we're going to explore this a little bit more. And it's used in a lot of different places by the biblical author. And so the first place I want to look is, I want to walk into the mind of David with you. Starting in Psalms chapter 36, verse 5, David will start to use this word. And we're going to see what he thinks about it and why he quotes it. Here in this situation, David is meditating on who God is and what God might do in his situation. So let's read that. Psalms 36, starting in verse 5, says this: "O Yahweh, your loyal love extends into the heavens. your faithfulness unto the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains, your judgments like the great deep. You saved man and beast, O Yahweh. How precious is your loyal love, O God. And the children of humankind take refuge in the shadow of your wing. You see, we start to see as David thinks on God's loyal love and his character, how it permeates all throughout creation, from the heavens to the deep of the sea. And God's loyal love, he starts to relate this to himself and his situation. And he says, your loyal love saves the righteous one. And that's kind of his conclusion from this. As you read on through the rest of the psalm, he starts to talk about his situation, how there's evil, and how God's loyal love protects the righteous one, and the evil one passes away. So we see here in the thoughts of David, a man who is described as someone after God's own heart. That's a really cool description. Thinks God's loyal love protects the righteous. So we're starting to get a better idea of this covenant term. So we're going to walk into his mind again in Psalm 103, starting in verse 6. And I'm not entirely sure when this psalm was written, but I have an idea that David has committed a sin here, because he's going to be talking about sins and forgiveness. Maybe he's thinking on the sin that he had with Bathsheba, maybe not. But we'll see what he has to say about God's loyal love into respect to this. He says this in Psalm 103, starting in verse 6. Yahweh does deeds of justice and judgment for all who are oppressed. Who made known his ways to Moses, his deeds to the people of Israel? Yahweh is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abundant in loyal love. He does not dispute continually, nor keep his anger forever. He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor repaid us according to our iniquities. For the heavens are high above the earth, so his loyal love prevails over those who fear him. For as far as the east is from the west, so he has removed the guilt of our transgressions. We can see here in the thoughts of David how God's loyal love forgives the one who has sin and iniquity. He removes the sin and transgression as far as the east is from the west. That's a really cool idea. There's no further distance. In fact, it's an impossibly far distance. And he just really thinks on this, especially through the rest of the psalm. As you look at it, David is continually going back to the sinful people are forgiven because of God's loyal love. Those who are in covenant with God are loved by him, and out of this love he forgives, even more than what the covenant requires. And this is a really, really cool idea. So we started to see this idea continue to develop of God's loyal love. The next example I want to talk about is on the human side of things. We'll see some humans display this action of loyal love to hopefully give us a better idea of what it looks like. So we're going to go to Ruth, starting in chapter 1. Ruth is a really, really cool book, and it's also a really cool lady who does some cool stuff. She is one who displays this loyal love immensely towards Naomi. And this story happens in a very dark time for Israel, the time of the Judges. And this is before Kings and after Numbers, where Israel's come out of the desert, has entered into the promised land, taken hold of it. Joshua has now died, and Israel forgot God. And they became evil and did great evil in his sight. And they were doing horrible things within the land. And then there's Ruth, who is a Moabite, not an Israelite, and she shows more faith than most of Israel. And it's this bright little speck of light saying there's still hope. It's a really cool story that happens in the midst of all of this horribleness of the time of Judges. And so Ruth starts off the book a little bit sad. Naomi and her husband and 2 sons are driven out of the land because of a famine. They're trying to go to a place where there's food. So they travel to the place of Moab. And here there's the 2 women, Ruth and I don't have her name written. The other lady is it's married to her 2 sons, and then her husband dies. And then her 2 sons die. And now even though Ruth and the other daughter-in-law are not married to her sons, they stay with Naomi and take care of her. And this is beyond what was required of them as her daughters-in-law. Because in their culture, if her sons died and she had no other sons to give her daughters-in-law, they were free to go marry into another family, to be provided for. Because the men are the ones who were providing for the women in this culture. And so, really, Ruth and the other daughter-in-law are seeking to provide for Naomi. And they do this over a period of time. And so Naomi, before she leaves back to her hometown, where since the famine has ended, is going to bless them. And so let's read that blessing in verse 8 of chapter 1 and 9. And Naomi says this. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go each of you return to her mother's house. May Yahweh show kindness to you just as you did with the dead and with me. May Yahweh grant to you finding resting place, each in the house of her husband." And she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and cried. So we see here the word kindness. And this word is loyal love, actually. It's chesed. Just like in the previous thing. It could be just translated loyal love here as much as it could be translated kindness. But Naomi says, just as you have shown the dead and to me. And she's pointing out Ruth and the other daughter-in-law, how they have shown great loyal love to her beyond what was the requirement of the marriage vows, because that is the covenant being brought in here. And so, after great convincing, one daughter-in-law does decide to leave. But Ruth says, "I will stay with you." No matter how much Naomi tries to convince her, she will not stay and she will not marry somebody else. She decides to go with her mother-in-law. And so, this is really quite a cool commitment that Ruth is going to make here. And so I want to read what Ruth says to Naomi making this vow basically to Naomi. She says this in verse 16. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So may Yahweh do to me, and even more, unless death separates you and me." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Now, it does not say it here, but we can see this as the continuation of the loyal love of Ruth from before. In the blessing that Naomi talked about, Ruth makes a mighty and faithful declaration here. You see, in their time, to make this trip as a old widow who is near death and Ruth, an unmarried woman, was very dangerous. For them to have made it to their destination was only by the protection of God. Israel is so evil, to make this travel meant surely death. And Ruth knew that when she made this declaration. When she's making this, she's not thinking they're going to live long. She's thinking she's going to travel with Naomi and die soon on the road. There's not much hope in this. But she says, "I'm sticking with you to the end. Whatever the end may be, whether it's death now or we make it to your people and they will become my people." She's saying, "I will not abandon you no matter what. And I'm going to leave my family behind. I'm going to leave the gods of the land behind, all of the security, all that I know, and I will go with you." And we see that Ruth does. And this is so far and beyond what she owed Naomi as her daughter-in-law. In fact, Naomi tried very hard to convince her to stay. But Ruth would not. And so it really brings out the heart of this word of loyal love that Ruth had for Naomi. And later on, we will even see that Ruth, once they finally make it to their final destination, will go out and will collect food and provide for Naomi throughout their time there. So we really have seen this word, I think, displayed well in Ruth. There's another story I want to explore with y'all in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 13. And here we'll see David and Jonathan making a covenant with each other. And this covenant will become very significant a little bit later on. And they're making this covenant because Saul is seeking to kill David. And they don't want their friendship to end because of it. They're very, very close. So this is what 1 Samuel chapter 20, starting in verse 13, says. So may Yahweh punish Jonathan and more if my father decides to do you harm, and I fail to disclose it to you, and send word to you that you can go safely. And may Yahweh be with you, as he has been with my father. And not while I am still alive will you show the loyal love of Yahweh with me, that I may not die. And do not cut off your loyal love from my family forever, not even when Yahweh exterminates each of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may Yahweh call the enemies of David to account. And Jonathan again made David swear an oath, because he loved him with the love of his soul, he loved him. So you'll see this play out, the great friendship of David and Jonathan. And we're going to fast forward to through the story to 2 Samuel chapter 9, starting in verse 1. And here David has become king, Saul has died, and Jonathan has died as well in battle. And David here is seeking to see if there's anyone left alive of Jonathan's household. And so let's read what David has to say. Then David said, is there still anyone who is left for the house of Saul that I might show? Then David said, is there still anyone who is left for the house of Saul that I may show loyal love to him for the sake of Jonathan? Now Saul's household had a servant whose name was Zibiah. So they summoned him to David, and the king asked him, are you Zibiah? And he said, at your service. Then the king said, but is there still anyone of Saul's household that I may show the loyal love of God with him? And Zibiah said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in the feet. And the king said to him, where is he? And Zibiah said to the king, he is here in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel in Lo-debar. So King David sent and brought to him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, from Lo-debar. So Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David. And he fell on his face and did obeisance. David said, Mephibosheth. And he said, I am ready to serve you. Then David said to him, do not be afraid, for I will certainly show loyal love to you for the sake of Jonathan your father. And I will restore you to the lands of Saul your father, and you shall always eat food from my table. Now this is really cool, because David, as the reigning king, is now taking care of what would probably be considered an enemy, a rival of the current king. This is the grandson of Saul, someone who naturally would be in line to the heir of the throne of the kingship. And naturally this person would be killed. But David says, according to the loyal love, to the commitment I made to Jonathan, I will take care of you. And this is so contrary to what they would do in their culture. You see, the loyal love of David was showing love and taking care of what would be an enemy, rather than a friend. And he makes him a friend. Mephibosheth is well taken care of after this. And so this is just a really cool example of loyal love. Again, not just necessarily taking care of someone you might like. You know, David doesn't know Mephibosheth. And so this person could possibly be an enemy and could hate you. But he says, I'm going to show you loyal love even though I don't know you. I don't know your disposition to me. It doesn't matter. I have made a covenant and I've made a promise. So I will uphold it and take care of you. So let's jump back to God. Looking at him again, and we're going to look at Jacob to see this in Genesis chapter 32. And Jacob here is returning to the land of his fathers. After stealing and kind of cheating Esau out of his blessing, and then he runs away, and then he goes and cheats another part of his family out of his livestock, and was running away from them, and is now coming back home. And Esau, he's about to eat Esau, and he's afraid of what Esau is going to do with him. That he is still going to be angry. But Jacob says this the night before his meeting with Esau. And so let's read what Jacob says. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Yahweh, who said to me, return to your land and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of all the loyal love and all the faithfulness that you have shown your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please rescue me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me, mother and child alike. Now you yourself said, I will surely deal well with you, and make your offspring as the sands of the sea cannot be counted of abundance. Now, it's interesting that Jacob says this. I'm not worthy of your loyal love. I didn't deserve what you gave me. Now, when Jacob says this, it's not hyperbole. It is true. In fact, as you read the story of Jacob, you really come to find he's a horrible guy who stole from his family, ran away, stole from another part of his family, ran away again. He never really was faithful to God. He never really trusted him until kind of recently. This is kind of a new thing for him to talk with God at all. God should not have shown him loyal love, but he did because God was in a covenant with this people. And Jacob mentions that. And so we see this same type of loyal love towards someone who does not deserve it, who might even be an enemy or an unbeliever, that God is showing to someone who doesn't deserve it, just like David did to Mephibosheth, or Ruth did to Naomi. And so we see this loyal love playing out once again. Then we come to another story of God showing loyal love to people who don't deserve it, and this is Israel. Very often, this is the story of Israel. The story of Jacob plays out in the story of Israel many times, and even within our own lives. So we come to Numbers 14, verses 11 through 19. And here Israel has done it again. They've chosen evil and to abandon God and to just do evil acts. And God's judgment is going to come upon them. But then him and Moses have a little talk. And this is what we see them have in their discussion. Numbers chapter 14, starting in verse 11. And Yahweh said to Moses, how long until this people will despise me, and how long until they will not believe in me? And in all the signs that I have done in their midst, I will strike them with disease, and I will dispossess them. I will make you into a greater and stronger nation than them. And Moses said to Yahweh, then the Egyptians will hear that you brought up this people from their midst in your power, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They've heard that you, Yahweh, are in the midst of this people, and you are seen eye to eye, and your cloud is standing over them. And in the column of the cloud you go before them by day, and in the column of fire at night. But if you destroy this people all at once, the nations that will have heard your message will say, Yahweh was unable to bring this people in the land, and he swore by an oath and slaughtered them in the desert. But now, please, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you spoke. Yahweh is slow to anger and great of loyal love, forgiving sin and rebellion, but surely he leaves nothing unpunished, visiting the sin of the fathers on the sons to the third and fourth generations. Please forgive the sin of this people according to the greatness of your loyal love, just as you forgave this people from Egypt until now. So in this talk with Moses, Moses asks for forgiveness from God because of his loyal love. And so, just like in Psalm 103, God's loyal love forgives the sin of the people. And Moses points out that this is a long history of happening. God's loyal love beats his judgment. It is greater than his judgment that is to come. And so, God does not bring judgment on the people as they deserve. He instead forgives them, his enemies, who are being evil, because he has made a covenant with them. Not because they deserve it, but because he is faithful to his promises. And we see this throughout the story of the Bible. God's rebellious people, humanity, as they do not want God and are in rebellion against him, and they do evil in the sight of God. things that are not good, that bring about destruction and death. And yet God says, I have made a covenant with you, and I will not destroy you. I will show you mercy instead. God's loyal love is so generous, is so much more than the covenant requires that he made with these people, who said, at Mount Sinai, we will do all that you have commanded, and then they don't. They have broken covenant and are deserving of the death that God is looking to bring upon them. It is not as if God's being unjust. He would be just and right in destroying them. They have broken covenant. But he says, since I have made a covenant, I will save you. I will show loyal love. So we again see God displaying this act even to those who don't deserve it. So that was a lot of stories and a lot of content. And from what we've looked at today, we've seen the loyal love of God in action, or loyal love in general in action. From the thoughts of David to the actions of Ruth. From the actions of David and finally to the actions of God himself. Loyal love is a covenant term, and it drives people to do things for the people they're in covenant with that are more generous and greater than what is required, out of the love and affection that they have for them. And this love and favor that is felt for this person and the great generosity that is then shown, that is the full meaning of this word. And hopefully we've come to see that in a fuller light. It is a word full of commitment and feeling and consistency. And so, in the closest covenant we have today to this, that looks like this, besides the one that we enter into with baptism with God, is the covenant of marriage. When you choose your spouse, you enter into a covenant with them, as we are told in the Bible, and you will do things for them because of the love that you have for them, for the rest of your life. Great generous deeds that are not always deserved. You will forgive the mistakes that are made within this covenant, and you will choose to love for the rest of your life. And so it's a similar covenant. The covenant we have with God uses marriage language. And so from marriage we see examples of this loyal love, and vice versa. From the covenant we have with God, we see the loyal love that should be shown in marriage. So that's just a really cool one that we can relate to well. We'll talk more later about God's covenants tonight. We'll kind of explore them and see how Jesus kind of plays into this and what all that looks like. So come back and study the covenants of God with us this evening. But for today, we've looked at God's loyal love. God will never abandon us. He will always forgive us for the sins that we've committed while we are in covenant with Him. He is always the same and will remain just like He did with the Israelites, faithful to us. If you are in need of support from this community today, or in need of prayer for you, or if you need to enter into the covenant with our God through baptism, please reach out to someone here or come forward as we stand.